Okay, we're back. Another problem for agriculture is loss of soil through erosion. Erosion is when soil is transported by usually wind or water away from its source to somewhere else. Thousands of acres of farmland is lost every year to wind erosion in the United States. So some ways to fix that. This one is called contour tilling. Instead of tilling straight across, contour tilling tills with the contour of the land, and its natural ups and downs. It allows for less erosion of soils. Other things that can be done, sorry about that, are windbreaks, planting trees where the wind blows, making terraces. These are kind of like steps, and we talked about contour pattern. And there's also a form of agriculture called no-till agriculture, where you don't plow the land, and all of those help to prevent erosion. Another problem is soil compaction. Soil compaction is when the soil particles get so pushed together that there's no longer any pore space between the soil particles. And in severe cases, it can create a pavement-like effect called desert pavement. What this does is, if the soil is too compact, then roots don't have any way to exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide for cellular respiration. Some other areas are unfit for agriculture because they have been polluted. There are plants that can help remediate soils, where you plant a weed species and then they absorb all of those harmful chemicals in the soil and reclaim those contaminated areas. And then those plants are disposed of safely so they don't recontaminate. Okay, so plants, a lot of times students think, this is a common misconception, that plants gain mass from the soil. They don't really gain very much mass from the soil. And a scientist by the name of Jan van Helmont did an experiment that showed that most of the mass gain from plants did not come from soil. So what he did is he planted a tree seed, and he had previously recorded the dry mass of the soil, and then he grew this tree for a long period of time. And when the tree was fully grown, he took the tree out of this pot and got all the soil off of it and dehydrated the soil and remeasured the mass of the soil. And the mass of the soil it did not lose very much. It was only a small fraction of the original mass that had been lost. He then dehydrated the plant and found that there was a lot of mass, but that mass, he concluded, not much of it could have come from the soil. Interesting thing about Jan van Helmont, he was actually, for this experiment, he was tried as a heretic in this time. So who knows for what reason. I guess he was going against what the established clergy said about the science of how these things worked. So later we discovered that carbon dioxide is responsible for most of the mass gain in plants, and we know that because of the photosynthesis reaction and the discovery of the Calvin cycle. Okay, so carbon dioxide and water are considered macronutrients because they are needed in very large amounts, but essential elements that are needed in small amounts are called micronutrients. That's kind of the difference between micro and macronutrients. And researchers, what they did is they used these things called hydroponic cultures to discover which nutrients were necessary for plant growth. So here's an example of one, how they would have discovered potassium. So they grew a plant in a solution containing all of the minerals that they knew of were necessary for plant life. And here is another plant in an experimental solution without potassium. And notice how it has stunted growth. The color isn't very good and no flowers. So through this they discovered all of the nutrients that plants need. And you'll notice that there's a bubbler in this, and that's because the roots need oxygen. Without oxygen, the roots would not be able to grow because they wouldn't be able to do cellular respiration. This table from your book, do not memorize it, but be familiar with some of those things. So those macronutrients should be pretty obvious. Carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, potassium, calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, and sulfur are also considered macronutrients. Remember CHOMPs? This has some of those, C, H, O, N, P, and S. And then we've added calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus in there. Know some of these major functions, and this is kind of a review of what we already learned in biochemistry, so this table would be a good table to go back and look at and figure out about micro and macronutrients. Okay, micronutrients, these are things that are needed in very, very small amounts. So chlorine, iron, manganese, boron, zinc, copper, nickel, and molybdenum. And then here are what they're needed for. And I don't think that any of these will be specifically tested in the AP exam, but it would be good to be familiar with these. These are typical of like some of the things that are in vitamin supplements that we take. Okay, so we talked about that. 9 are macro and 8 are micro for plants. A deficiency in macro and micronutrients can do different things to plants. So these are corn leaves. Top one is a healthy corn leaf, and then the next 3 are deficient in phosphate, potassium, and nitrogen. We've talked about biotechnology a little bit. We will get more into that and review more of that as we get closer to the AP exam. Genetic engineering of crop plants helps to improve plant nutrition, and it helps them to use fertilizers more efficiently, is kind of the main thing. Some plants are resistant to toxins like aluminum in the soil. Aluminum, when it's in acidic soils from like acid rain, will damage roots because the aluminum reacts with the carbonic acid or the sulfuric acid in acid rain and reduces crop yields. Let's see, have been engineered with bacterial genes that secrete a different kind of acid that can bind up and tie up aluminum. Some plants are genetically engineered to be flood tolerant, so when a root is waterlogged, it will when it's deprived of oxygen, it can build up ethanol and toxins. But some strains like of rice, there's a flood-resistant strain of rice that is more tolerant to those toxins than other things would be. Smart plants are kind of interesting. They tell a farmer when it's beginning to be deficient in a certain thing, like this one has a blue tinge indicating when they need a phosphate containing fertilizer. Okay, the last concept I think for this part is that plants depend on other organisms, sometimes to free, well, not sometimes, but all the time, to free up nutrients available for them. So one example, dead plants decompose and the soil-dwelling microorganisms break them down, and those nutrients can be reused by plants. Interestingly enough, there are plants that secrete substances that give nutrients to microbes and allow them to break down that dead matter to make it more available for the plant. Okay, this layer near the soil by the plant's roots is called the rhizosphere, and it's got a high activity of microbes because of the sugars and amino acids and other organic acids that are actually secreted by roots. One of the key players in a symbiotic relationship with plants are rhizobacteria that enter the roots and produce hormones that stimulate plant growth. They do several other things too. They produce antibiotics that can protect roots from diseases from other bacteria. They can absorb toxic metals. They can make nutrients more available for uptake. So a lot of times seeds are inoculated with rhizobacteria to help increase crop yields. Let's review the nitrogen cycle real quickly. The source of nitrogen is a nitrogen gas in the atmosphere that is fixed by bacteria to ammonia. And ammonifying bacteria can also make ammonia from organic material. Next is the formation of the ammonium ion, which can be uptaken by plants. Ammonium can also be converted by nitrifying bacteria into nitrate, which can be taken up by plants. This is kind of, I think we've already seen this before, so this is review. And then nitrate can be denitrified by a third type of bacteria that converts that back into nitrogen gas, so we have the full cycle here. Now this is how most nitrogen gets put into soils in a non-commercial way. Commercial fertilizers put a lot more nitrogen in the soil for our crops, but through natural cycles it's all dependent on these nitrogen fixing bacteria, nitrifying bacteria, ammonifying bacteria to make nitrogen available in a way that a plant can use either as ammonium ion or nitrate. Okay. Sometimes plants even have symbiotic relationships with those bacteria. These are the root nodules of a type of plant called a legume. Legumes are peas, alfalfa, peanuts, all in that family of plants. And these root nodules host that bacteria and allow them to produce the nitrogen that they need. In exchange for that, the plants give the bacteria nutrients that they need. And you can see in this picture how a quote-unquote infection occurs. It is infected with bacteria, but it's a good kind of infection for that plant. Without it, a lot of plants actually don't grow very well. Farmers do rotate crops, so they'll plant legume one year and then a non-legume, a nitrogen-depleting crop like corn the next year to help maintain soil fertility. And I'll see you in part 3 in a few seconds.